In 2016, my wife and I were asked to teach a class at our local church on gospel-centered grandparenting. When we first received that request, we were taken aback. A class on gospel-centered grandparenting? Who ever heard of a class on grandparenting? We sure hadn't. No one had ever taught us from the Bible on the ministry of grandparenting. I'm Dr. Larry McCall, a pastor since 1981 and the author of Grandparenting with Grace, Living the Gospel with the Next Generation. Did you know that there are about 30 million professing Christian grandparents across North America? 30 million. That's a huge demographic, isn't it? Of the surveys that have been taken among professing Christian grandparents, do you want to guess what percentage have received training from the Bible in the ministry of grandparenting? Less than 1%. So if you think of the grandparents in your church, maybe none, or maybe only a handful have ever received any training from the Bible in the ministry of grandparenting. You know, if I were to ask you about the family life ministries in your local church, my hunch is that most of you would be glad to tell me rather quickly of all the things you do. You have a plan for premarital counseling. You take engaged couples and you want them to be successful in their marriages, so you have a plan to train them from the Bible, what marriage is about. You take those people that are married and you have classes and seminars on marriage. You take parents and you say, we're going to have a class on parenting, or we want you to read this book. We want them to be successful in raising their children. But if I were to ask you, what are you doing in the realm of equipping grandparents? Very few pastors could say, well, we do this. Very few churches have intentionally gathered the grandparents together and taught them from the Bible what His Word says about grandparenting. And yet grandparenting is not a forgotten issue in the Bible. Grandparents are not some sort of addendum to the family. Starting way back in the book of Moses, like Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 9, it says, teach them the things of God, to your children, listen, and your children's children. There's a thread from there on through the Bible of grandparents impacting the coming generation for God's glory and the good of the children, their grandchildren. Many of you pastors have been so faithful in teaching the people of your church the truths of God's Word. You've been so careful, some of you for decades, of equipping your people in the gospel, showing them how the truths of Jesus Christ shape everyday lives' most crucial relationships and responsibilities. And yet, when asking you about how are you equipping the grandparents in your church, most of us would have to say, I haven't done really much of anything in that realm. In fact, I don't even know where to start. If that's your situation, please don't feel bad. You're not alone. Most of the pastors in North America have not been trained in how to equip and mobilize the grandparents of their churches. But let me offer you some hope. Let me offer you some help. Even though the Christian grandparenting movement is still relatively young, there are some on that journey that are a little farther down the path. And there are men at Christian Grandparenting Network that would be glad to serve as coaches, mentors, in local churches, helping them understand how to begin a sustainable ministry in equipping and mobilizing this huge untapped resource of grandparents. That those grandparents could be equipped and mobilized to help you in your church's ministry to reach the coming generations with the gospel of Jesus Christ. So let me encourage you to reach out to the Christian Grandparenting Network asking for help. Could someone coach us? Could someone help us get started? It's just ChristianGrandparenting.com. It's the Christian Grandparenting Network. Reach out, look for the contact page, and we're glad to begin a communication with you of how we might help you begin a ministry of equipping and mobilizing grandparents in your church. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing how God might work in your church for His glory and the good of the coming generations.